Hi. Uh, we're going to be talking about optimizing images in Umbraco. Just a quick introduction. I'm Matt. You'll find me on Discord and on the Umbraco forums, all with that little logo. It looks much nicer than my face, so that's good. Also on that handle, so that's where you'll find me. And earlier this year, I joined the team at Embrace. So just a quick introduction to Embrace. It's an independent brand and marketing agency. Recently been made an Umbraco Platinum Partner, and amazing, that's cool. And it's just a team of really highly talented, forward-thinking creatives that I feel very honored to be part of. So that's the company. So we're talking about optimizing images in Umbraco. And I've put that horrible phrase, best practice, into my title. So just when we're talking about best practice, really what we want to be looking at is principles. For any principle, there's many ways to implement it. We might just look at a few examples of implementation. It doesn't mean that the implementation is the best practice. It's the principles we want to really consider. So we're going to be looking at things that affect editor experience, how things look visually, performance, and SEO. Okay, so just the why, what, and who of what we're going to look at. So why are we looking at image optimization? Well, I'll start with a statistic. 51% of bandwidth from the average website comes just from the images. If we look at all the media together, including video, that's 76%. So our media, particularly the images, make up an enormous part of the bandwidth of what we're sending down the line. And another statistic, 8 seconds, we've probably all heard this one, that's the time that we have to grab someone's attention when they look at a website, which means I've already spent too long on this slide, but we'll move on beyond that. So, but thinking about that 8 seconds, how much text can you read on a web page in 8 seconds? And how quickly can you scan over the images and get an impression? So again, the images are a really big part in grabbing our attention. So we want to get these things right. So the what, we're going to look at a set of different properties around images. We're going to look at the aspect ratio. That's just literally the relationship between the width and the height. We're going to look at pixel size, literally how many little dots of color is it made up of. We'll look at the alt tag, which is how we describe our images in words. And we're going to look at the file format, literally how those pixels are stored and compressed and delivered to the browser. And the who, well, we want to just see who's affected by all of this. So we're going to look at a few different roles. We're going to be looking at the designers and the devs, the editors that are handling all this content. Very importantly, obviously, our site visitors. And finally, sort of stakeholders. That's just anyone who's interested in the success of the project. So we've considered the why, what, and who. We're going to look at those 4 different aspects as the structure of today's consideration. So the first of those is our aspect ratio. And that's literally the relationship between the width and the height. But that has a big impact on how our images are, or it's impacted by how our images are created, how they're displayed and cropped. And also our perception of an image can be affected by the aspect ratio. So I just want to start off with a little bit of history. Paul, just a minute ago before me, was saying he was obsessed with London. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a little bit obsessed with photography, so there might be some camera references in here. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at a few different aspect ratios that have either been really common or are still common. And the first of those I want to look at is 5:4. And it all started in the 1850s when cameras looked like this, and they were enormous. And people produced 8x10-inch prints. And that was the start of the 5:4 aspect ratio becoming really popular. And then the early television sets in the 1930s and 40s, they had that 5:4 aspect ratio display. And then it sort of disappeared for a while, and then for some reason in the 2000s, everybody's desk had one of these on. It was one of those. It was a 1280 by 1024 monitor, and it was just on every desk in every office, and a 5:4 aspect ratio. But today, it's sort of disappeared. Unless you're buying picture frames, which for some reason still seem to be 8 by 10 inches, then it's really sort of an aspect ratio that's disappeared. 4:3, though, is one that has much more history to it and relevance. In 1892, it became the standard for silent movies. So all movies had that 4:3 aspect ratio image. And then as TV matured into the 1950s, then they all had that same aspect ratio because that was what all the material was in. That meant that when we started making computers that all needed a screen, all these tubes had been made for televisions, so let's use those same tubes and put them in computers. So all our computers had a 4:3 aspect ratio screen as well. But today, what you might not realize is that nearly every smartphone, the sensor in it probably has a 4:3 aspect ratio sensor. So that means that there's an enormous amount of content being created today in this aspect ratio. 3:2, 100 years ago now, 1925, Leica created the first 35mm film camera, and that had these little cassettes that many people will recognize and are still manufactured today because it's become very hipster and cool again. And all this whole series of cameras have been made over the years that have used that film shape. I did say there might be some camera references in here. But today, all of our modern DSLRs and mirrorless cameras that are probably producing most of the professional imagery for our websites will have a 3:2 aspect ratio sensor. So again, this is a very large part of how content is created for modern web. So the good old square, couldn't look at aspect ratios without considering that. That became really popular with the introduction of this type of camera, the Rolleiflex, in the 1920s, late 1920s. Into the 60s was the Hasselblad camera. Every iconic 1960s fashion photo that you've seen in a book or a magazine was produced on one of those. The moon landings, all those photographs were taken on one of those. So they became a very important piece of history. Those of us that are old enough probably remember the Polaroid camera with its square. And then 15 years ago, along came this thing called Instagram, and this is an early version of the Instagram logo. We can see where it came from. Again, made that square aspect ratio really common. But today, probably, the place we use a 1:1 more than anything else is when we want to put profile photos, and they're always in that 1:1 aspect ratio. 16:9 is one that's become popular, first of all in widescreen televisions that used to look like this from the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. All of our modern TVs are the same format. Most of our laptops, most of our desktop screens are 16:9. This is how we consume content largely today. For the last 10 years, all our mobile phones have been designed to have that 16:9 aspect ratio so that we can really see all this content, video content really easily. And although now today we use all our videos this way up and bezels aren't popular on mobile phones, it's still optimized for that aspect ratio. So it's just a turned round version that everybody's creating with Snapchat and TikTok and the like. So 1:1, 4:3, 3:2, 16:9, these are sort of the standard language, design language that's very popular today with authoring all of our content. Now there's one more I just want to talk about. You get some odd aspect ratios. This one, 32:9, this is one I call the Dean screen. Now, lots of you know my good friend Dean, because they'll be your friend too. Dean's got one of those screens, you know, the ones that just go on like this and give you neckache to look at. And I had a call with Dean recently, and so he shared his screen, and I saw this. Or actually, it was on my laptop, so it looked a bit more like that. Which meant that I could see absolutely nothing. Sorry, Dean, mate, I can't see a thing. Just describe what we're looking at, because I can't see it. So what all of this shows is that aspect ratio really matters. It has a big impact on how things are created, how we consume them, and how we make sure that things look great on our websites. Now, the thing in the past, when we were locked into all those cameras and the like, was that whatever aspect ratio we created it in probably was how it would be consumed. But now in web, of course, we can just change from the original to whatever we want as the need suits us. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at just a fictitious website. We've got this Sky Blue Consulting. It was going to be called Blue Sky Consulting, but apparently someone's used the term Blue Sky, so legal said to change it. So we're going to look at this fictitious site, Sky Blue Consulting, and we've got this sort of standard design, something that might come out of Figma, and we're just going to implement this and look at a few different types of ways in which aspect ratio can be relevant. So the first thing I want to do is just consider those times where we consume the aspect ratio exactly as it's been uploaded. We don't change it. We just take whatever's been uploaded to the media center and consume it as it is. And this probably occurs more often than not in article pages for news sections and blog posts, where we want to just drop an image in line into our page content. So here we've got two images. The aspect ratios are slightly different. They've just been dropped in exactly as they are. So probably got something like this in our CSS, where we're just saying this is the maximum width with the container, the heights are worked out automatically. But how much space does the browser leave in that situation? Because the browser doesn't actually know how tall the image is until it's downloaded it. Well, it turns out the amount of space it leaves is 0. And this is what happens. So we're on our mobile phone. We've got a slow connection. We've started reading this site. We're reading about our thinking outside the box content here. You won't find any cliches in this sample site. So we're reading this, thinking outside the box, and suddenly this happens, and it just moves down. And then while we're reading it again, this happens as an image appears, and the content's moved again. And this is a problem known as cumulative layout shift, or CLS, which is just a lot easier to say. Now, the thing with our expectations as users is we expect things to appear underneath everything in order. We don't expect things to appear out of sequence, because when we do, it's just really annoying. So CLS is a really big problem for usability. So the way to overcome it is to tell the browser what the aspect ratio is before it's even got the image. And we can do that just by putting some CSS in place. But because, so when we've got these two together, the aspect ratio and our standard CSS, then the browser knows how much space to leave. It can allocate the space before the image is even loaded. So when we look at our media section, we've got a whole range of different aspect ratios in those images. This is sort of typically what it would look like. And the browser can then use that information as we send it. But in order to do that, we need to put a little bit of CSS in line, because it's going to be different for each image depending on what the user has selected. So it can't be in our compiled CSS with everything else. The aspect ratio we need to send in line. So we can just put a style tag in, add in the aspect ratio. And to do this, we can use a helper method. So we can just put into our view style equals model.image.aspect ratio CSS. And if you haven't seen that extension method, it's because here's the code. It's not a standard one that's available. piece of code I'll be sharing at the end, so don't worry if you don't get to photograph it. But basically all it's doing is it's taking that media crops item and it's looking up those Umbraco width and Umbraco height properties and calculating the aspect ratio and spitting out a bit of inline CSS. So we said before that this typically happens with inline content in our articles, and that's almost definitely going to be in the rich text editor. So possibly the way we've done this before is just to select an image using the image picker option that's part of the rich text editor. But of course, we don't have any control of the markup when we do that. So the way to overcome that problem is to remove the checkbox for the image in our configuration and add the checkbox for a block. Then what we can do is we can put an inline block. There's a little fly here right around my face. So we can add in an inline block, and there we can put a picker. We can also add any alt tags and any other bits we want. And of course, then we have the ability to control the rendering. So then our editor just clicks on the insert block button rather than insert image, and then they can add the image in that way. And that means that we can then render out our aspect ratio before the image is downloaded. So here we are again on our slow collection. There's some gray space there where the image is going to appear when it does load. No CLS and a much better user experience. So just with the addition of changing how we configure our rich text editor and using that, we can help with that. So what to do? Ensure the browser knows the aspect ratio of each image. I've used this example because this is the type of case where it probably doesn't. Most other cases where we're setting it in our CSS is covered, but often these are the ones that get missed and cause a CLS issue. How to do it? We inject images into the rich text editor with a block rather than actually as images, and then we can use an extension method to render the aspect ratio in our output. Who benefits from this? Well, our site visitor definitely, because no annoying CLS. Fantastic, much better visitor experience. But our stakeholders love it as well because our site now performs better for SEO because there's no CLS, and the search engines reward us for that. So our stakeholders are happy too. So the next consideration with aspect ratio is where we want to adjust it. So, for example, maybe we've got a 3:2 aspect ratio original image, and we want to output it 1:1, for example. So this time we're going to look at our Meet the Team section of our design. Here we've got a set of 5 little images of the team. So we'll just have a look at how we make the best of that. So if we look back at our media section again, we can see that all of those portrait images, although they're all portrait, the aspect ratios are slightly different. These have all just come straight from a stock library, and I haven't changed the aspect ratios. There's those sort of variations. But in reality, if this is coming from a photographer who's been commissioned to do the work, he's probably done some cropping as well before we get them to get rid of those funny bits that he doesn't want to show in the image. So the images will come in a variety of aspect ratios. So when we look at our Meet the Team design, we can see we've got a nice and consistent set of images there. And probably what we've just done is injected the image in line. We're using model.image.url. That's what the documentation will tell us. That's how you put an image into a view. And we've probably got the center cropping part handled by CSS. Our front-end team have probably done that when they've built the front end. So when we come to edit our content, drop those images in, then we get them all out. Even though they were started at different aspect ratios, the CSS has got that covered. And so we got something that looks like our design, or almost like our design. If we look at our design here, we can see that with a designer's eye, they've balanced all those headshots out to the same size. We'll just go back to what we output from our site, and we've got that. We can see it's subtly different. So let's overcome that problem just by putting a bit of control in for the content editors. So here we can, in our media picker, we can select a crop. We've got at the bottom of the screen a crop there called portrait. And then where we currently inject model.image.url, we can use model.image, get crop URL, and then use the alias of our crop. And that now, when we come to the content editor comes to use that, they can go into the team members, and here we have one of the team members, Leela, whose image was looking a little bit distant. So they've used the little slider at the bottom. That's zoomed in a bit on it. They've moved it up, higher up, so we've got a nice balance. The same for here for Michael. Moved it up to the top and to the left, zoomed in a little bit more. We've cropped out Michael's really cool camera, but that upsets me, but not anyone else. And so that all looks much more balanced as well. Okay, so now when we go back to our site, so we've published that. This is what we have before. We refresh our page, everything looks more balanced. So although we had it covered nicely in the CSS, and the front-end developers are always going to do that, they're going to make that work nicely, let's still just add that extra step in that gives our content editors that bit more control. So what to do? Give the content editors the power to control cropping of any fixed aspect ratio content, even if the CSS has already got it covered. It just creates a great editor experience. How to do it? Well, create a media picker, add a crop, and then use the get crop URL extension. It's really easy. So it doesn't take long to do, but it can just really improve the quality of images being output. Who benefits? Well, the designers are happy because they don't see this glaringly bad design decision from their point of view. Content editors are happy because they're in control and they can make that look great. So the next thing I want to look at is dynamic aspect ratio, and that's those cases where the container can change in aspect ratio on different devices and different screen sizes. So we might have uploaded an image that looks like this, and in certain situations it's going to get cropped into something portrait, and in other circumstances it's going to get cropped into something landscape. This is something where we're sending the full image to the browser every time, but it's been dynamically cropped by the CSS. So I want to talk about something a little bit new here, just a slightly new technique for this. And we're going to use the Sky Blue Consulting call to action block at the top of our design to look at that. So here's what it looks like when it comes out on a desktop display on a screen. It's quite wide. The text is in towards the center. On our laptops, it looks a bit more like this. We can see the aspect ratios changing. It's becoming more compressed. The height's the same, but it's not as wide. When we get down to a tablet, it's compressing in again. We get a bit smaller to the next breakpoint, and we swap to a third and two-thirds so that the text doesn't become too compressed. But when we get to the smallest variation of that, we end up with something like this. And now that center crop is really not looking very good. We've cropped out half of somebody's face, and there's just a nose poking in from the side. So that doesn't look wonderful. And then the next breakpoint, if we just zoom it in a bit now because we're getting smaller, the next breakpoint we go down, we start stacking. Again, a bit of cropping there. The tops of the head's not optimal, but we're taking that center crop, and as we go down to mobile, that looks good. So the desktop looked just like the Figma design, and the mobile looked just like the Figma design, but it was those places in the middle where things didn't quite look so good. That the front-end team have taken that standard approach of handling those dynamic crops correctly. So what we do is we find our extremes. We've looked at all of those, worked out where the extremes are, and we've identified these two. And it turns out in this case, they're actually just 1 pixel apart in width either side of a breakpoint. And these are the issues that we want to fix. So when we're talking about finding the extremes, we're just going to want to ask this question, what would Dean see? So if Dean was to maximize our sight across his screen, what would it look like? Well, something like this. I didn't actually have a Dean screen available, so this is a simulated one, but we get the idea. It's going to look daft. So when we're building, screen sizes are getting bigger and bigger. When we're building these, let's just put a maximum in. Put some white space or black bars or whatever to either side of the page, but just set a maximum width in your CSS. And then the content here, the amount of text in this box is defining how tall that image is. So what happens when someone takes that 5-page Word document and pastes it into our CTA block? We know someone's going to do it. It's going to happen. So let's just put some text limits on our content entry so that it can't get too big. It only needs some character limits on our fields, and we've got that covered. So let's make sure that there are actually finite extremes. So we found our extremes of aspect ratio. We've made sure that they are finite. And we can just simply go into the inspector, grab the sizes for each of those, note them down, and then we just create a picker that we use for this call to action block. And it's got 2 crops in it, one called wide, one called narrow. We'll just zoom in on those so we can see at the bottom. We've just taken those widths, copied them straight from what we inspected in the browser, and dropped them in. Now the names here don't matter, they're just descriptive. They're just so that it means something to the content editor. So we've configured our editor experience, and it's just using standard Umbraco features, so that's great. So we've got a way of managing that. So when we're editing our call to action block, and we click into it, and we click into our image, and then we go to edit that, then we now see on the right-hand side, we've got a wide and a narrow crop. If we just zoom in a bit on that, we can see that we're getting exactly what we saw in our front end, because that's the center crop by default. So we could move the focal point, or we could click into our narrow one, and we can, having clicked into it, we can just drag this window. This is standard Umbraco features, and we can say this is how we would want that extreme of aspect ratio to look. And we can do the same for our wide crop. We can just drag it down a bit so that the tops of the heads aren't cut off. That just looks more balanced. So we've defined that. We've got a great editor experience. Our editor now can say this is very visually how I'd prefer those crops to look. So yeah, great editor experience. So how then do we wire that up together? Well, there's a little package. Like anything, I had an itch that I wanted to scratch, so I wrote a package to handle this. It's called Dynamic Crops. It's available for Umbraco 13 LTS. It's available for 15. It should work on 16. I'm going to test it after this talk. If it doesn't, I'll make sure there's a version that does. It's just literally installing some C# code to handle some stuff for us. So now what we can do is we can just put another inline style tag. We can say we want to put a model.image.object position CSS. And that's going to output something that looks like this into our site. It's just going to say the object position is 68% and 31%. And that calculation is coming from knowing the aspect ratio of the original image, knowing our aspect ratio of our 2 extremes, doing a bit of mathematics to work out what that is in CSS terms, and outputting that for us. And that's it. It's really easy to wire up. So this is something that we could very easily retrofit to all of those sites that have got a center crop. We can just add that in, use the package, use the helper method, and all of a sudden things will work. So when we go back to our site and we look at this breakpoint and we refresh the browser, then we get that which looks better. And when we go to this breakpoint and we refresh the browser, we get that which looks frankly, 1,000,000 times better. And this is, something that's used all over our websites, all over the place. So this is a very easy thing to retrofit. So we've got a great visitor experience, and we've covered a regular issue with image cropping. So what to do? Give the content editor the power to control that cropping. It's something very visual and something that's very easy to understand and work with. And how to do it? Well, the most complicated part really is just identifying those extremes of aspect ratio. That just means a little bit of trying all the breakpoints out and seeing where it becomes the tallest and the widest. And then we create a media picker with those two crops, install the package, and then just inject that into our view. Who benefits? Well, everyone's happy because the designers are happy because their design looks great, the content editor is in control, the site visitors see something that's engaging. If we go back to that 8 seconds of grabbing their attention, they're not just noticing that someone's nose is poking in the side, they're actually seeing the intent of the image. And our stakeholders are happy because we're showing the brand to the best way possible. So the next aspect, not aspect, I've been talking about aspect ratios too much. The next thing I want to consider is image size. Image size, we're talking literally about how big is the image. So let's have a look here. We've got a picture of Sophia, who's a member of this fictitious team, and we've got the same picture with just some with more detail than others, just at different levels of pixel density. And that really relates to how large we want to use the image in our output. That's the basic principle. So if we actually look at this image in the back office, it's 4,480 pixels by 6,720. So that's 30 million pixels of data in that image, or a 30 megapixel image. That's come straight from a digital camera, been uploaded to the back office. Very typical. And if we look at those, size in bytes means nothing. I just look at that and get confused. But if we work it out, we're looking at 4,000K or 4 megabytes to download that JPEG. And that means there's a lot of detail in the image. There's a tremendous amount of detail in that image because it's come from a fantastic camera. And yet that's the size we're going to put it in our website. So we just don't need all that detail. Okay. So there's this resizing process that goes on, and it's all about where that resizing process happens. So if we take that full image and we use the standard image.url method, then we send 4 meg across the internet to our browser, and our browser sizes that down to display it in a tiny size. And of course, what we want to do is the reverse. We want our server to resize that image, send a small amount of data across the internet, and then the browser's already got it in the correct size. So if we take that approach, what sort of effect does it take that approach of replacing the model.image.url? We need a sized one. One way to do it is just to stick a width on the end of our URL. That will resize it in the output. We can use the crop method that we just looked at a minute ago. That's another way of doing it. So either of these are good ways of doing that server size resizing. It's all built into Umbraco for us to use. And this is a bit of a rhetorical question, really, but what size do we want to send? The answer should be obvious. So just a little bit of when we come to those dynamic crops, how do we resize those? We know the width of our container, but because we're using this CSS cover technique, we actually need to send an image that's that wide. And now, so when we're putting together our picture tag with all our different sources and breakpoints for our dynamic items, trying to calculate this can be a bit of a tricky thing. So in those cases where we know it's going to come out vertical, we could just set the height instead. So we can put height equals on the end of our URL, and then we haven't got to work it out. We just know that that's the correct size. In the cases where we're going to crop that way, we can use the width equals. So it's just a little useful tip that means that probably our picture tags, where we've got multiple sources for these types of dynamic containers, will probably have a mixture of height and width as we work out those breakpoints. So, coming back to our design, if we look at all the things we just looked at there and apply that resizing, what effect does it have? When I just output that page with image.url on the end and did no resizing, then I created a very small page with 18.2 megabytes of image data, just taking that raw data. When we resized it on desktop, it came down to 741K. On a mobile, it came down to 629K because the images needed were a bit smaller. And you end up sending just 3.3% of the data that we sent before we did the resizing, a 30th of the size. So I know this isn't linear, but let's just say that our original page took 30 seconds to download. We're looking at something in the region of a second now instead. So a 30th of the time can be really relevant, particularly when it's on a slow connection. So next question we can actually ask with resizing images is, do we actually need to send the image? Because it might be that we don't need to send it yet, or in some cases, not at all. And an image that we don't send, of course, is 0 bytes of bandwidth. So, of course, we're talking here about lazy loading, and lazy loading is really easy to do now. We can literally just put that attribute into our image tag. Loading equals lazy. It can be as simple as that, and the browser will only take that image when it's needed. If we want to combine it with our sizing, then there's a fantastic package called Slimzy. If you're not already familiar with it, I would definitely suggest having a look. And if we're using lazy loading, don't forget to make sure that the browser always knows the aspect ratio, because that CLS issue can become more of an issue with lazy loading. So it's just good to keep that in mind. So what to do? Send only the size of image needed, and only actually if it is needed. Tremendously reduces the amount of bandwidth. And how to do it, always size your image. A simple rule is look at your code base. Have you just got .url and 2 brackets against an image item? Probably you should put some sizing in there. And then calculate your sizes, consider your breakpoints, put multiple sources into your picture tags. All of that can help. And apply lazy loading. It's so easy to do that we should put that in automatically. So who benefits? Well, most definitely our site visitor benefits, because the site loads quickly, the content's there straight away. Again, it's really good for SEO because it's rewarded for fast loading sites, so our stakeholders are happy. So some definite benefits in applying this. So the next thing I want to talk about is alt tags, how things are described. 53% of the issues that come up on typical accessibility audits are images that don't have alt tags. So that's more than half of a typical accessibility audit is just the fact that the alt tags are missing. So the standard approach for a long time has been to edit the image media item and add an alt tag, alternative text field into that, so that you can populate that when you upload the image, and then anywhere you use that in your site, you've got some alt text. But if we go and look at the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative guidelines, and this is a really useful one here, the alt decision tree, just to help us work out what our alt text should be. Then we don't have to scroll down far before we start seeing it talking about the current page or context of the image. And that means that the same image in different pages might have different alt text. Or it might be in certain conditions, we actually deliberately leave it blank. So context is really important. So when we're editing our content, here we've got the set of the team that we were looking at before. Then when we go into our image, it's always good to put an alternative text in context with the image picker. So here I've just done this using a block. The block's set to a single item, and then it's a nice way of encapsulating that as a single data type that we can just use over and over and over, so that we've got alternative text in context. And we have here a little text box for it's a decorative image. That's just something we've put in to help us when we come to do accessibility audits, because that means we can see that actually the editor deliberately left the alt text blank. It wasn't an omission, it was a decision. So that's just something to help with auditing content later on. So another alternative is the accessible media picker. If you're not familiar with it, it's a package by Nick Rimington. What he's done is he's taken the image picker, the standard image picker, and added an alt text thing into the image picker itself, which is brilliant. But at the moment, that's currently only for version 13, and everything else in this presentation is techniques that we can use on 13 LTS, 15, 16 going forward. So it might change. For now, I've just used that example of using the block approach because it's something that we can definitely know that we can use going forward. But if you want to look at the package, here's where to find it. It's definitely worth having a look at. So what to do? Well, we want to include alt tags in our content. That's the most important bit. But really, the other takeaway is make them context specific, because that really is important to get that right. And how to do it? Well, basically, where you have a media picker, make sure you've also got a text box so that someone can add the alt text. And it's also good for the content editor. It makes it life easy for them because there's that prompt every time they use an image to also, yes, we must do the alt text. Who benefits? Well, definitely our site visitor. That's who we're doing it for, isn't it? We're doing it for that percentage that rely on that. But it's easier for the content editor. The stakeholders are happy because less comes up in the accessibility audits. And so it's a win for everybody. So the last thing to do with images I want to talk about is the file format. This is all about how we consume it. So there's a few formats here that we're probably familiar with: a GIF, a JPEG, a PNG. I don't know how old you all think those are. I was quite surprised. The newest of those is 30 years old. So they've been around a long time, those formats. Now GIF, we know is good for little animations where the colors and the detail look awful. So it's used for memes today, but I think that's going out of fashion. JPEG was designed really for photography, to make that look good. And the PNG was always really good for those things where you didn't want those artifacts, so for company logos and so on, but probably now we should be using an SVG. But there are newer formats around, and we think of WebP as a new format. But did you know that's 15 years old now, WebP? So that's been around a while. So that's definitely something we can make use of. If we have a look at can I use, then WebP is available for 95.62% of users. So we need a fallback for that 4 and a bit percent, but we should definitely be looking at using this. You may have come across a slightly newer one, which is the HEIC file. If anyone's got an iPhone, then their camera will be producing those. Technically, very good format, but it's never going to make it into browsers because it's actually really complex, and it's got hideous licensing, which just means that it's not going to be adopted. So we can forget that one. The slightly newer one again is the AVIF file. That one is even better at compression than the WebP. If we look at that on Can I Use, then that comes up with 93.57. So that's doing really well as well. So that's definitely one to be looking at. And then JPEG XL. XL doesn't stand for extra large, which is probably the first question everybody asks. The X is, JPEG have had all different standards, and the X is just part of their language, and the L means long term. So the idea is that these newer formats are all coming out, and they're basically trying to say everything you other guys could do before, I can do better. And JPEG XL is just the next iteration in better compression, better quality, but it's aiming to be an open standard. Usage is not adopted now, but this is definitely one to be looking at in the future. Okay, so now Umbraco out of the box handles WebP. It's all part of just the stuff we can put on the end of the URL. So that's great. And then if you're using Cloudflare CDN, then Slimzy and Cloudflare image URL generator together can be really good. So that handles WebP and AVIF. What effect does this have if we use just WebP in this example, where we get better quality images, half to a third of the size of JPEG, so it's really worth the effort. So that's definitely worth doing. So what to do? Definitely use modern file formats. There's a few ways of doing it. We could just add types to our picture sources, so we can, in our picture tags, we can say, here's the WebP, give that first, and then the JPEG second. If the browser can support WebP, it will use it. If it can't, it will fall back to the JPEG. Or we could use the Cloudflare image URL generator, which just moves it all to the CDN layer for us. So everybody benefits by using that. So just in summary then, we've looked at 4 different aspects. We've looked at aspect ratio. We looked at a new technique for dynamic crops, so we can just make sure that the user always sees the highlighted part of the image. We looked at pixel size. Just basically, I think the simple answer is don't use the .url extension. Make sure you're always sizing images. Alt tags, make sure they're there and they're easy for the content editor and they're context specific. And file formats, just use the modern file formats because they're easy and they have an enormous impact. And everybody benefits, so it's just worth putting into practice. So that's how to optimize images in Umbraco. You can find me on MTT BLSS on all the different places that we all talk about Umbraco. Just like to say thank you everybody for coming. Thank you Codegarden for having me, and thanks to Dean for his silly screen and being such a good sport to let me talk about it. And of course, our site was just a work of fiction. So here's the barcode. It's got the materials. It's got the code snippets. It's got links to those different packages. Thank you very much.